Hello all, my name is Matthew Flores and I am the Graphic Design Fellow at the School of Design, University of Tennessee-Knoxville. My presentation today will explore the first phase of my experimental practice that attempts to bridge the gap between radio and graphic design, finding methods by which invisible sound waves can become manifest in visual artifacts and vice versa. In particular, this body of work is focusing on so-called fuzzy radio modes, Hellschreiber, radiofax, and slow-scan television, and appropriates these largely obsolete methods of transmitting visual information into tools for graphic experimentation and expression. So let's take a quick tour through these technologies in order to understand their visual idiosyncrasies. The oldest is Hellschreiber, a method of sending text by radio invented in 1929. Through Hellschreiber, letter forms are divided into smaller pieces and then sent digitally as a series of on-off tones similar to Morse code. The word Hellschreiber translates to bright writing or clear writing and was originally used to transmit text to newspaper bureaus in the years before and during World War II. Hellschreiber was supplanted by teletype and was very nearly extinct by the 1990s before it saw a revival by computer and radio enthusiasts. Radiofax, in contrast, allows for the transmission of monochrome images via radio waves. Developed primarily as a method for disseminating photographs and negatives more quickly than through the post, several newspapers experimented with radiofax as a way to deliver a print edition over AM radio. Today, it's most often used as a tool for transmitting weather charts and maps to remote ships without internet access, although Kyoto News in Japan continues to broadcast complete daily newspapers in both Japanese and in English. A single edition can take up to 8 hours to broadcast. Radiofax was in turn mostly phased out in favor of slow-scan television, which allows for color images and a much faster transmission time, 10 seconds to a few minutes per frame. This 256 by 320 wide pixel format is still popular with ham radio operators today. However, it was most famously used to broadcast video from the first moonwalk in July 1969. So a goal of this project is not to fetishize obsolete technology, but rather to find ways to adopt their methods of dissemination and use their graphic traits and quirks to complicate how we generate design and ultimately use design as a vehicle for communication. To that end, each of these methods provides a specific opportunity to examine both how we use technology to design and how that technology alters the meaning of the resulting message. For example, Hellschreiber, being a text-only mode, exposes the convention of representing language visually, and how this act of filtering text through technology can introduce miscommunication, artifact, and misunderstanding. So in this first experiment, I transmitted misheard lyrics from the band Kiss. And in this example, I performed a duet with two handheld radios, transmitting the text of the Abbott and Costello comedy routine, Who's On First? I then translated the result into print form, making physical my original disembodied performance. I do think it's worth pointing out the sense of failure and futility built into this process. By limiting myself to relatively weak transmitters and only using obscure modes, even to amateur radio operators, I often have this sense of sending messages in a bottle, so to speak, with doomed transmissions to no one in particular. It's a process that actually lends itself nicely to thinking through the limits of how we're able to communicate and the necessary gap between intent and interpretation. Nim Chimpsky was a chimpanzee raised by researchers to test animal language acquisition and non-human communication. Using American Sign Language, Nim was able to string together sentences. His longest was, give orange me, give eat orange, me eat orange, give me eat orange, give me you. Scientists are still today divided on whether this represents actual acquired language or if Nim was simply mimicking the signs of his handlers. Thinking through the limits of technology, radiofax in particular is quite slow compared to more contemporary, familiar, and largely instantaneous forms of sending and receiving information. This 8 by 10 inch image took just over 24 minutes to transmit in full, for example. In comparison to sending a text or an email over cell service, which is itself a form of radio propagation, radiofax is slow, it's cumbersome, and it's susceptible to distortion, poor reception, and static. Ultimately, I find this a valuable part of the process, actually, as noise and artifact highlight the literal and conceptual distance between broadcast and reception, and the act of transmission becomes a collaborative conversation between designer, medium, and viewer. As Maria Papadimana-Laki, a member of the feminist radio group Shortwave Collective, puts it, radio is about fragility, vulnerability, exploration, experimentation, failure with bold letters, failing to receive and transmit sometimes. It's about being bold with using technologies that you're not comfortable with. Acknowledging the friction inherent in using technology reminds us of the importance of the human element in this transaction. Framing this process as a conversation largely between the user and the medium calls into question where exactly failure ultimately falls. So in this experiment, I make a daily ritual of failure, each morning transmitting one frame of Evel Knievel's 1967 jump over the fountain in front of Caesar's Palace Casino. Fully broadcasting the 24-second video in this manner will ultimately take a little over 2 calendar years. So at the beginning of this talk, I mentioned the fact that these technologies are considered quote-unquote fuzzy modes. This term was coined by radio operator and writer Murray Greenman to articulate the fact that these formats employ digital transmission but human-readable reception. Humans today navigate a digital world using an analog toolbox of sense and perception, a fact made complicated when most contemporary methods of communication are intended to be read, interpreted, and translated by a computer. Unlike, say, the long list of coded values that represent the color and brightness of any given pixel in a JPEG, for instance, fuzzy modes result in images that need no decoding once the message is received. These modes, then, exist in the gap between digital and analog, machine and brain, and leverage technology for transport but rely on a human user for interpretation. Because of this fact, fuzzy modes function less like a set of visual and sonic codes and more like a language, one that gently shifts our focus away from the content of the message and toward the matter of how we communicate with one another through technology. As Eduardo Cott writes, the aesthetics of telecommunications operates the necessary move from pictorial representation to communicational experience. Ultimately, transmitting visual information via fuzzy radio mode is full of contradiction. It's non-visual by nature, yet produces a very particular graphic aesthetic. It's immaterial, yet reception is bound by a specific physical space. It's obsolete and niche, yet it creates an opportunity to interrogate our interaction with the digital world of today. Because of this unique position, I propose that adopting fuzzy modes as a tool for graphic production can refocus our relationship to digital interfaces and underscores the importance of human perception when communication is necessarily mediated through technology. Thank you.